Thank you very much, Shani, and I do apologize. I'm having some sort of internet connectivity issue. However, luckily, here in New York, I was sitting next to one of our speakers today, Amalia Gamio, who's kindly let me speaking this point from her laptop. But as we start today, it's my privilege and honor to join with the network of independent experts and on behalf of the Validity Foundation on this webinar entitled "For Her for Having Dreams." This is an expert workshop on the monitoring report unveiling torture and ill treatment of persons with disabilities in Bulgarian institutions, including in small group homes. Before we start, a few accessibility tips. Today, we will have closed captioning. To be able to use this, please click on the closed caption Zoom menu button to start viewing the captions. To increase the font size, click on subtitle settings and move the slider to adjust the caption size. To view the caption transcript, click on Show Full Transcript. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Just a sec, Stephen. It is frozen.
We also have today international sign language. If you have any issues with the international sign interpretation, please contact us in the chat box. Today, we are launching a report entitled "For Her for Having Dreams," a monitoring report on torture and ill treatment of persons with disabilities in Bulgarian institutions, including in small group homes. My colleagues will place a link to this report that you will be able to access in the chat box. Next slide, please. If you would like to ask a question, and after the presentations of our speakers, we will have time to address these. You can ask a question in 3 ways. The best way is to write your question in the Q&A box. You can also ask a question in the chat box, and you can also raise your hand. We will unmute you so that you can speak directly into the webinar. Next slide, please. A few accessibility tips for all of our speakers today. Please say your name and organization when you speak. Keep your point as short and clear as you can. Please use plain language and avoid jargon. Please be respectful of one another's time. Keep your microphone muted so that we don't have background noise. And please do not use acronyms. Next slide, please. Today, we have a distinguished lineup of speakers. After this introduction, I will hand the floor to Tanya Petkova from Bulgaria, who will speak about her experiences of surviving institutionalization in that country. Thereafter, my distinguished colleague, Sándor Gurbai, will provide an introduction to the report we are publishing today. We will then move on to statements from a very, very distinguished panel, starting with Elīna Šteinerte from the UN Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture, followed by Amalia Gamio from the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Our friends and colleagues from the European Network on Independent Living and the Independent Living Institute will be represented by Jamie Bolling, and then we will hand the floor to Aneta Genova from the Network of Independent Experts in Bulgaria, following which we'll have some time for questions and answers and a short concluding session. I should say that today we did also invite a number of other distinguished guests, but unfortunately we have received apologies from the Committee for the Prevention of Torture in the Council of Europe, from the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Council of Europe, from the European Union representatives of DG Regio, Employment and their legal services. We will, however, be providing this report and the recording of this webinar to all of those representatives. So I think that's the final slide. And without further ado, I'd like to first of all introduce our first speaker today. Tanya Petkova is from Bulgaria. She is a psychiatric clinic survivor who is treated with ECT. She is now a law student and wants to fight for the rights of children and fighting cancer. Tanya, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Hello. Thank you for your invitation to this event. My name is Tanya. I am 38 and I live in Bulgaria. I'm a psychiatric hospital survivor. I have been inpatient almost 50 times and have seen, heard, and gone through things no one deserves to be submitted to. It is important to talk about what people go through while being patients in psychiatric hospitals and other institutions, for no patient even knows they have rights, let alone knows what their rights are. For instance, electroshock therapy and being physically restrained to the bed is not simply a violation of patients' rights. Those are sheer forms of torture. And patients are not aware of that either. And last but not least, I never knew whom to talk to about what I was going through. It is very important to talk about all the things that happen at mental health clinics and small group homes so that as many people as possible become aware of what patients go through, and also because people who can do something to make things better can find out what is happening there. If those who have been there say nothing, then there is no way to make things better. I lived in a small group home for a while, so I'm going to share my personal experience about my stay in it. I went to live there by my own will in an attempt to escape the stressful situation at home. And the person who told me about this was a doctor from the mental health clinic in which I had gone for treatment. They informed me what paperwork I had to do and how much I would have to pay if I got any benefits from the country. I was told I would be better off there, where I would become more independent, would learn to take proper care of myself, and would live with people who would be able to relate. I had no idea what things would be like before I moved in. The small group home actually turned out to be a small apartment, and there were 5 more women who lived there, for they had nowhere else to go. I have a very long and traumatic history of domestic violence and other sorts of violence, so I went to that group home in an attempt to escape the stress. There were a total of 3 rooms, 2 balconies, and a bathroom. 2 of the rooms were used as bedrooms, and they had 3 beds each and a nightstand beside each bed. Also, there was 1 wardrobe in each of them. I remember the bedrooms were very small and we had no private space. In the kitchen, we had a table, chairs, a stove, and a microwave. Also, we had a daily agenda that was not made by us, but we had to keep it to avoid problems with the staff. We had to get up at a certain time, make breakfast, eat, and go to a sort of a rehab center where we did different arts and crafts and made lunch. I don't remember who decided what we would cook, but it wasn't us. We had to leave the center in the afternoon and go back to the small group home where we took turns cooking dinner. At the beginning of each month, a staff member made a list of the groceries and bought them, but we didn't get to choose what would be on that grocery list. We had a laundry machine and took turns using it. I don't remember if using it was free or not, though I think we were not allowed to use it every day. A nurse visited us on a daily basis to hand out our meds, and a psychologist came probably once or twice a month to help us deal with everything we were facing. I don't think a doctor ever visited us during my stay, which was about half a year. We were not allowed to go out without the permission of a staff member, and when we did have their permission, they told us when to come back, and we were not allowed to have visitors either. The only thing that we could choose was what clothes to wear. There was no staff member with us 24/7, or at least during the night in case of an emergency. I didn't know whom to call if any of the other women or I needed help right then and there. I felt guilty, useless, hopeless, and helpless. If I was emotional, there was no professional to talk to immediately. I think I mentioned it once to a staff member and they were like, "You should be thankful you are even here." That made the feeling of guilt even stronger. It was like I was taking the place of someone else who needed to live there more than I did. At some point, I started feeling selfish. I remember a night during which I woke up because it was hard for me to breathe. We did have a phone, but I was sure that even if I did call for an ambulance, I would be dead before it arrived. I still can't say what triggered that panic attack, but I do remember the fear I would be gone in 5 minutes or so. I wouldn't get to hear my mom's voice for the last time. But back to the reasons why I chose to move into that small group home. I was subjected to domestic violence since I was 5, and what is worse, I didn't realize I was a victim back then, and no one told me what was actually happening to me. I was looking for a way to get away from all that violence and the terrible stress it caused. No one in the small group home helped me realize I was a victim, and no one referred me to a therapist or to a help center to help me get out of the situation, which was full of violence. Instead, they kept giving me stronger medications to help me be more patient and suffer in silence. Back then, it felt like the mental health clinics and the small group home were the smaller evil. I had no privacy at home and at the clinics, so it hit me really hard when I went to the small group home, and it turned out that there was no way to have any sort of privacy there either. I ran away from something bad to end up at a place where things were worse, and I didn't dare complain because I had gone there by my own will. The rules that we had at the small group home were very restraining, limited our freedom, and were practically a form of violence. At the same time, there were no rules that could make the restraining rules less restraining. It was like I was going in circles all the time, and I am talking about a cycle of violence that changed its forms, but it never stopped being violence. Trying to make things better by moving to live at that small group home was an epic failure. I had less privacy and stronger stress despite it being different from the stress I had at home. I didn't become more independent either. Instead of sending people to such group homes, society has to start recognizing violence that people who have psychosocial difficulties are being victims of and explain this to us. We need to be taught ways to overcome stress and be provided with a safe and a violence-free environment. We need professionals who can offer us access to legal help and emotional support. We need to be a part of society instead of being isolated, avoided, or even hidden in those small group homes. We need help to learn to distribute the money we have and be taught to make priorities like buying medications, food, and paying our bills instead of buying things we don't really need. At that small group home, I met people whose lives were more painful than mine, but they couldn't count on anyone. I am blessed to have people who support me, and I'm growing out of this. I have no idea how many people deteriorate and lose their lives because they don't have any support, have no touch with the outside world, and suffer in silence in those institutions. And no matter how many they are non-existent to the outside world. I would like to make a plea, finish the speech. Please do not call people who have psychosocial difficulties crazy. Don't laugh out loud when we pass by you, and keep in mind we are not the way we are because of something good. Our health problems are caused by horrible events. People please don't get your pleasure from more pain. For you have your demons you're trying to chase down, and you have your skeletons in your closet too. I don't wish to anyone to start having psychosocial difficulties or any other health problem, though the truth is no one is insured against anything, and any of us may need to use a wheelchair at some point or be treated with chemotherapy in the future. It is human to be vulnerable, but it is not human to use one's vulnerability as a tool to humiliate or isolate the person. Thank you once again for giving me the privilege to share all of this with you.
Thank you very much, Tanya. Your testimony is incredibly powerful. We also thank you for your leadership and advocacy to advance the rights of persons with psychosocial disabilities, and your plea was very well heard. It is human to be vulnerable, and we should not use this, indeed, to put people in institutions. We should not use this as a way of segregating persons with disabilities. So thank you very much for your powerful contributions today, and I hope you will join us in the discussion that will continue hereafter. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
We'll
Stephen.
now, please. Thank you. We will now move on to our second speaker for today. The second speaker will be my colleague and distinguished guest, Sándor Gurbai. Sándor is a disability rights lawyer holding a PhD in law and political sciences. He is impact manager for Validity, and he was the chief investigator of the report that we are publishing today. At Validity, Šteinerte leads validity advocacy strategies to improve human rights protections for persons with psychosocial disabilities and persons with intellectual disabilities in Central and Eastern Europe. He is a researcher affiliated with the Essex Autonomy Project at the University of Essex in the UK, and he is also an external lecturer on disability rights at the ELTE University in Hungary. Sándor, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. And I would also like to thank Tanya for this really very deep presentation. Let me share my screen to be able to go on with my presentation. Just a second. So my presentation's key message is that the institutional care model itself violates the right of persons with disabilities to freedom from torture and ill treatment. And also this report is about that institutional culture prevails in all type of institutions, including in small group homes. As Stephen already mentioned in the introduction, the report has the title of Poor Her for Having Dreams. I would like to start with a quote from the Special Rapporteur on Torture from 2008. At that time, Mr. Manfred Novak was the Special Rapporteur on Torture. And the report containing this quote was issued just a few months after the entry into force of the CRPD. And this quote says, persons with disabilities are often segregated from society in institutions. Inside these institutions, persons with disabilities are frequently subjected to unspeakable indignities, neglect, severe forms of restraint and seclusion, as well as physical, mental, and sexual violence. The Special Rapporteur is concerned that in many cases, such practices, when perpetrated against persons with disabilities, remain invisible or are being justified and are not recognized as torture or other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Our current report confirms the Special Rapporteur's concern. So our monitoring visits took place in October 2022, and we visited 10 small group homes, 1 big social care institution, 1 psychiatric hospital, and 2 daycare centers located in northern Bulgaria. You can see one of the group homes which we visited in the picture on this slide. The title of this report is a quote from a staff member of a group home. While the woman with disabilities was present, the staff member told a member of the monitoring team the following: "You know, poor her. She has no dreams she has dreams of having a family, a husband and children. Can you imagine? Look at her. You know, this can't happen. Poor her for having dreams." To us, this is a clear example of verbal abuse. Our report shows that not only big social care and psychiatric institutions are characterized by practices of torture and ill treatment, but small group homes as well. We have found many elements of torture and ill treatment, for example, placement under guardianship, neglect as passive abuse, like covering, for example, lack of meaningful activities, failure to meet persons with disabilities' basic physical needs. Concerning the basic unmet needs, we observed, for example, missing light bulbs and lampshades, no personal items in the rooms, old and dirty sofas, mold on the wall, no soap, shampoo, towels, toothpaste, toothbrushes in the bathrooms, no shower curtain, broken toilet, or no toilet seat. One of the staff members of a group home told us during the visit, sometimes if one of the residents is using the toilet and another wants to use it, the second one uses the bathtub as a toilet. Yes, yeah, that was the quote, sorry. So we found other forms of torture and ill treatment as well. For example, abuse of power, like paternalistic approach of staff members towards persons with disabilities. We found punishment, for example, locking cupboards as a punishment for disobedience of the residents, or use of restraints. One of the residents said, for example, "They make me crazy here. They sent me to the psychiatric hospital and they gave me a lot of medicine and injections because sometimes I get excited. Last time I was in the hospital was because I got into an argument with another resident, but I apologized." Taking persons with disabilities to the psychiatrist for checkups, for not behaving in the right way, is a punishment, definitely, and emotional abuse and abuse of power. Another resident of a group home shared with us that "I don't know what medications I am taking. but I take a lot. I am often given injections, but I don't know for what. So forcing residents to take medication if they don't behave well is a hidden form of torture and ill treatment. And the special rapporteur Manfred Novak was talking about this sort of approaches. We found even more forms of torture and ill treatment. For example, lack of meaningful complaint mechanisms, financial abuse, like for example, residents don't have their own money, emotional abuse. Like to give you an example, there were group homes where residents were not allowed to put pictures on the wall, even in their rooms, and they were not allowed to have or to use their phones. But we also found reproductive abuse. For example, concerning sexual relationships and pregnancy, staff members mentioned that no one was making or thinking of sex, and that female residents were too old anyway. And they said apart from one woman whose family already took care of that, and she came to the institution with an intrauterine device, an IUD, controlling her pregnancy. 2 residents in a group home were considered dangerous and were locked up in a room which was divided by metal bars from the ceiling to the floor in order to, as for them, to protect the rest of the residents and the staff. At the time of the visit, 2 residents were locked up in this room, which looked like a cage. The director of the group home said about one of these residents, he doesn't belong here, but there is no other place for him. Our monitoring report reveals numerous signs of total institutions concerning group homes. For example, like no choice of where to live, no choice of who to live with, no or strictly controlled contact with the outside world, physical signs of segregation. For example, like institutions are located in remote areas. And I continue this list of signs of total institutions. We found strict daily routine, identical activities, lack of control over day-to-day decisions, obligatory sharing of assistance with others, and total control and paternalistic approach by the staff. One of the residents said, for example, I was told I cannot live alone because I cannot do many things on my own and I need help, but I really think I have learned a lot and I'm doing well on my own. We listed several recommendations to the United Nations Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture, the SPT, to the European Commission, to the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture, the CPT, to the government of Bulgaria, to the Ombudsman of Bulgaria, to the Chief Prosecutor of Bulgaria, and to the maintainers, managers, and staff members of institutions, including small group homes. In our recommendations, we call for conducting, facilitating, and financing genuine and CRPD-compliant deinstitutionalization processes, including preventing institutionalization, abolishing group homes, developing support systems, and applying the redress and reparations framework. Thank you for your attention, and over to you, Stephen. I just stopped sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Sándor. I think it is worthwhile at this point reflecting on the fact that the small group home model is the primary focus of the deinstitutionalization programs in Bulgaria, but is also becoming a very, very common form of service more widely across the European Union. I think both this report, as well as the testimonies we have heard from Tanya, show that these places don't represent a step forward on the right to independent living, and indeed they place persons with disabilities
at sometimes incredibly great risk of further rights violations inside these places. So without further ado, we will now move on to hear from a number of distinguished experts on their reflections and responses to the findings that we are publishing again today. The first expert will be Dr. Elīna Šteinerte. Dr. Šteinerte is a Latvian human rights lawyer and academic with 2 decades of experience, now residing in the bailiwick of Guernsey. She is a member of the United Nations Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture, the SPT, from 2023 to 26. She is a former chair, rapporteur, and member of the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention from 2016 until 2022, and has been appointed OSCE Moscow mechanism expert twice in both 2023 and 2024. Elīna, I would like to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much. And of course, at that moment, I lost the screen that I was supposed to share. I apologize. Let me try once again. I think we have it now. So once again, good morning and good afternoon. It is a pleasure to share this event with you on behalf of the United Nations Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture. Before I go on to my presentation, I wanted to express my sincere appreciation to Tanya for your very powerful testimony. It is absolutely horrifying to hear what you had to go through, and I commend your strength for fighting on and for making sure and making your contributions that others would not be subjected to that. I also thank you, the colleagues from Validity, from this extremely interesting and very insightful report, which is at the heart of the event today. What I would like to do today in the next few minutes is to give you some insights into the approach of the United Nations Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture in respect to monitoring places of deprivation of liberty for persons with disabilities. As you know, there are 3 main points that I would like to very briefly touch upon. First of all, the mandate of the SPT, Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture. Article 4 of the optional protocol to Convention Against Torture, which contains the very important definition of the term deprivation of liberty. And finally, very briefly, some insights into the approach of the SPT towards monitoring places for persons with disabilities. Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture is rather different United Nations Human Rights Treaty body. Different in that while it is also established by UN Human Rights Treaty, it is not one which only spends its time in Geneva. In fact, we actually spend very little time in Geneva. We do not receive state reports. We do not consider these reports and issue concluding observations as all other UN treaty bodies do. Instead, SPT has been called a new generation human rights treaty body with a mandate in the field. It means that our approach is hands-on approach towards establishment of the true approach towards treatment of persons who are deprived of their liberty by authorities or other parties. In other words, we carry out somewhat very similar to what Validity was describing in their report. We visit places of deprivation of liberty, and we make recommendations to the authorities as to how to ensure that systems and safeguards are in place so that nobody could ever be subjected to treatment akin to what Tanya was describing to us. The key element here is Article 4 of the Optional Protocol to Convention Against Torture. And here in my slide, I have a very small excerpt from this. And that excerpt goes to the heart of the meaning of the term of deprivation of liberty. What is deprivation of liberty? What is a place of deprivation of liberty? And this provision states that that is any place under state jurisdiction and control where persons are or may be deprived of their liberty, either by virtue of an order given by a public authority or at its instigation or with its consent or acquiescence. It is any form of detention or imprisonment or the placement of a person in a public or private custodial setting which that person is not permitted to leave at will by order of any judicial, administrative, or other authority. So this is a very, very wide, encompassing definition. And what it makes absolutely clear that facilities that were described by Validity are absolutely covered by Article 4 of the optional protocol. What it also means that they are covered by the mandate of the Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture, as well as by the national preventive mechanisms, which are, if you wish, the national extension of the Subcommittee on Prevention of Torture. Taking this opportunity, and this is really my first opportunity to do it publicly, I am delighted to let the audience know, some of you already know, that the SPT for a while has been working on its very first general comment. And that general comment focuses specifically on this wide encompassing term, deprivation of liberty, on Article 4. What does it mean in practice? And this general comment was adopted by the plenary of the SPT last Friday in Geneva and is now undergoing the requisite editorial process before it can see the day of light and reach the people to whom it is addressed to. So, deprivation of liberty. It must be understood, and the OPCAT makes it absolutely clear, as does the jurisprudence and practice of the SPT, that this concept, deprivation of liberty, must be understood broadly to encompass both public and private settings and situations in which there is state instigation of, consent, or acquiescence to the deprivation of liberty. And that absolutely, without a doubt, includes healthcare and social care settings, such as psychiatric hospitals, care homes, including facilities for persons with various types of disabilities. And what has the SPT done in this regard? Because of course, our mandate is always, it's a living mandate. We go on the visits, we implement that on the ground. So we have always made it sure that such facilities, be they private, be they public, are included during our field work, during our visits to specific countries. We examine the legislation applicable to such places. We look for safeguards against involuntary treatment, involuntary hospitalization, institutionalization. We look at their practical implementation, especially when it comes down to this voluntary and involuntary treatment and institutionalization. We look to sensitize national preventive mechanisms around these issues, and we make tailored recommendations. In my next slides, I'll give you some, I have copied out here some examples of the public visit reports to illustrate how our approach has materialized in practice. So first of all, here I have an example from Argentina. I'm not going to read out, in the interests of time, the very lengthy quote here, but just to show, in this particular example, when we visited Argentina, the SPT was looking at the National Mental Health Act, which has been long coming and was finally adopted. However, the SPT noticed that the act's enabling legislation had not been adopted, and as a result, the application of this very new legislation was only partial and highly dependent on the interpretation, resources, and understanding of each psychiatric institution, which was the subject of this piece of legislation. As you can imagine, the disparities in application of the law were significant, and of course, all to the detriment of people with disabilities in these institutions. Somewhat similar here, an example from Mexico visit, where the subcommittee was pointing out that in accordance with Article 12 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, safeguards must be established for persons operating with the informed consent of the persons exercising their legal capacity. Informed consent to treatment, informed consent to being in institutions, and assisting individuals with exercising their legal capacities. To this end, the subcommittee was specifically emphasizing the need for legal representation. So it's just some examples of the work of the SPT along legislative frameworks and safeguards. There is also many examples on the SPT's jurisprudence around the treatment and conditions of deprivation of liberty in such facilities. I have, for a change, a good example from Mali, where the SPT was commending an open door policy in the hospital where psychiatric unit was located. This open door policy was applied to patients who were free to move in and out of the establishment. And in those instances where restraints were used, there was a specific and duly kept register of all the restraints used, the time that they have been used, etc. There were specific efforts made to ensure that once the treatment is finished, that the persons are able to return to their family and community life. The only challenge that the SPT saw in particular there was the fact that the medication and the treatment and the cost of that was solely on the shoulders of the families. And of course, one can only imagine what happened to those who could not afford the cost of that. Very different experience, very different observations from the SPT are from Kyrgyzstan, a visit a few years ago, where the SPT was appalled by extremely poor sanitary conditions, old rundown buildings, no physical possibilities for physical activities, which led the SPT to conclude the conditions in this facility amount to inhuman and degrading treatment. And my final point, and this is, I think, goes also very much to the heart of what Sándor was telling us about the new report that is at the heart of the event today, is the discharge. Visit to Argentina, again, example where the SPT has specifically highlighted that many psychiatric hospital patients are not there to receive treatment, but because the hospitals to a large extent operate as social welfare centers for persons without resources or a family to support them. Very similar findings in respect to Mongolia, where the SPT was pointing out lack of community-based services, halfway houses, which would enable people to live supported life in community if that is necessary. So what I wanted to illustrate by these three examples, 3 slides, is the very comprehensive approach to what the SPT takes in looking at the legislative framework in terms of the safeguards that is applicable and must be robustly applied in each individual case when a person is being institutionalized. Secondly, looking at the treatment, the regime, and of course, the conditions that are prevalent in such facilities. And thirdly, recognizing that this must always be only a temporary measure if it is necessary at all. The community-based services are the best way forward. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Elīna, for this overview of the work of the SPT. Your confirmation, of course, that psychiatric hospitals, social care centres do fall within the mandate of the SPT for monitoring purposes. This is very important. I think an area of work clearly for us, especially with the UN human rights system, is ensuring that the standards are also matching between different treaty bodies as well. And so from your work on the SPT, we will now move to the work of the CRPD committee, another human rights treaty body with whom Validity is very lucky to regularly work. And I would like to introduce our next speaker, who is Amalia. Amalia briefly was born in Mexico City, studied medicine at the National University of Mexico, and has a master's degree in the inclusion of persons with disabilities from the University of Salamanca in Spain. From 2002, she participated in the work for the preparation of the draft of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities until it was approved by the General Assembly in 2006. She was elected as a member of the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2019 to 2022, and then was re-elected for a second mandate from 2022 to 26. She is currently elected Vice Chair of the Committee for the period of 2023 to 24, and co-chair of the Working Group on Deinstitutionalisation, which recently developed the guidelines on deinstitutionalisation, including in emergency situations. Amalia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I am very happy to be here. First of all, I want to thank you to invite me to this important event, to the people who contribute with their experience to build this important report. I want to highlight the accuracy of the methodology of the impressive monitoring report of torture and ill treatment of persons with disabilities in institutions, including group homes, and acknowledge the intense work it must have required of the team. The name of the report highlights the pitiful way in which society at large views persons with psychosocial or intellectual disabilities. General Comment number 6 to Article 5, non-discrimination, says persons with disabilities can be disproportionately affected by violence, abuse, and other cruel and degrading punishment, which can take the form of restraint, of segregation, as well as violent punishment. Institutionalized women and girls with disabilities are further susceptible to gender-based violence, including forced sterilization, sexual, physical, and emotional abuse, and further isolation. They also face increased barriers to reporting this violence. I would like to highlight 10 points from the report in relation to the guidelines and in general of First, the incomprehensible fact that most of the institutions for persons with disabilities in Bulgaria have received funding from the European Union for creating small group homes, reconstructing and refurbishing all institutions. European Union money was used for disability-based discrimination and segregation. It speaks of the existence of many vested interests who subsist on international funds and who wish to continue to maintain the institutions, psychiatrics, so-called non-governmental organizations, pharmaceuticals, builders, and along, etc., who care less about the respect for the autonomy and dignity of persons with disabilities. But the last straw comes when we read that UNICEF, a United Nations agency, and a Bulgarian television channel raised funds for the repair of a small home. 2, 16 years after the entry into force of the Committee on the Rights of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and with the clear definition of violence and non-discrimination by these and other human rights conventions, as we listened with the last speaker, there should no longer be any doubt that the violations faced by persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities in institutions are torture. 3, the report also confirms beyond doubt that institutions, including so-called group homes, are places that go against Article 12, equality before the law. Denial of legal capacity constitutes arbitrary deprivation of liberty. Against Article 19 of the Convention, the right to live independently and to be included in the community, and its General Comment number 5. Against Article 14 and its guidelines, as informed consent is not respected, and the argument of alleged dangerousness continues to be made to subject them to forcible confinement and medication, isolation and coercion. A staff member replied, atrocities happened when residents were spending some time. Number 4, all in this report shows violations of Article 15, protection against torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, and Article 16, freedom from exploitation, violence, and abuse. All group homes for persons with disabilities, monitors visited, are characterized by elements of torture and ill treatment, including placement under guardianship, neglect, abuse of power, financial, verbal, and reproductive abuse. Uninvestigated death, lack of meaningful complaint mechanisms, and even what could be classified as forced labor, contrary to Article 27 of the Convention and its General Comment number 8, by making them work in the cultivation of their food without remuneration. 5. The report also confirms that no matter the size of the segregation place, if it has the characteristics that even group homes in Bulgaria have, they are still institutions. General comment number 5 says, neither large institutions with more than 100 residents, nor small functional homes with between 5 and 8 persons, nor even individual homes can be called independent living systems if they contain other defining elements of institutions. Number 6, another situation verified in the report is the persistence of the medical model towards disability, opposite to the human rights model of the Convention. They continue to call residents patients. They continue to be classified as mild, moderate, and severe, as even untreatable persons. It is imperative to remember our dear colleague, Robert Martin, who left us at last April 30, and who lived in practically all his life in institutions, and of whom it was said that he was not capable of making his own decisions. What would the members of the institutions visited by the Validity Foundation in Bulgaria think about what Robert achieved in this fruitful life? Would they continue to label persons with intellectual disability as severe when they have tried virtually nothing to enable them with the right to support to be another Robert Martin and become a member of the committee? 7, persons with disability experience the most disgusting discrimination in institutions, including group homes. As the report points out, they live under an imbalance of power. When the monitors spoke to them, they look at the staff for approval. They fear living in the community because they have been taught that they are not capable and that they are better off in the institutions. We have to read that a young person would like to become independent, but cannot due to lack of resources, which should be provided by the state under the Convention, instead of continuing to waste it on segregation. 8, they have understood nothing of what is involved in complying with the Convention, specifically with Articles 12 to 17 and 19, and the guidelines on the institutionalizations. Documents found in the institutions in Bulgaria on assessment of individual needs and support plan are identical except for the name of the resident, and even identical in all institutions. 9, deaths in institutions have occurred in many other states, as in Bulgaria. Staff members are not criminally punished, nor is restorative justice provided to family members. And 10, the recommendations made by the monitors who prepared this report are broad and specific, and there is no way that they cannot be complied with. In conclusion, institutionalization on the grounds of disability is a form of violence and discrimination. Guidelines on the institutionalization, including emergency situations, comes to provide a new tool to end the practice of institutionalization, so that the state's parties, in full coordination with persons with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities, finally apply real the institutionalization process. We do not remain only in rhetoric. It is a whole process, detailed step by step in the guidelines. It's precisely a process that does not happen overnight, but that cannot continue to be left behind as it has been until now, when little has been done to eliminate institutions and implement community services. The states parties on the convention have the tools to stop confronting persons with disabilities to unethical and immoral segregation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amalia, for these powerful reflections on the report. And I think we strongly agree with you that very little has been learnt in some cases about how to ensure the dignity, autonomy, and inclusion of persons with disabilities. I'm reminded that as we speak here today, the Conference of States Parties to the Convention is electing new members to the committee, among which is a representative proposed by the European Union. And you explained, I think, very, very clearly problematic role the EU has had in propagating particularly this model of small group homes. So I think there will be some important discussions to come following the election today. We're now going to move on to hear from a colleague from the European Network on Independent Living and great friend, Jamie Bolling. And Jamie is joining us today while simultaneously the European Network on Independent Living also has another side event. So we are incredibly grateful to you, Jamie, for joining us today. By way of very brief introduction, I would say that you, as you've written here, you live in the north of Sweden, are the director of the Independent Living Institute in Stockholm, and was the director of ENIL, the European Network on Independent Living, and have been a member of the European Fundamental Rights Platform's Advisory Panel from 2010 to 14. I understand you're on the board also of UNICEF Sweden. We've heard about UNICEF today, and are the president of My Right, the Swedish disability organization for international development cooperation. You have many, many distinguished certificates, degrees, and honors to your name. But Jamie, we know you as a fierce fighter for independent living, and so I'm delighted to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here today. It's fantastic for this opportunity to speak at such an important conference. Thank you, Tanya, for your sharing your testimony and your advocacy. It was very strong. Elīna, we're waiting for that general comment. That should be a tool that we can use in our work and our advocacy. And Amalia, when you talk about the EU funding, yeah, that's my tax money, and it's shameful that it's spent this way. Anyway, this report, thank you very much for this report. Once again, exposing what happens in institutions, especially those that were developed as part of Bulgarian's deinstitutionalization strategy funded by the EU. With the Center for Independent Living, Sofia, and the Validity Foundation, we at the ENIL, or the European Network on Independent Living, are members of the Global Coalition of Deinstitutionalization, and challenge the way the EU funds are being used in Bulgaria. We've done this for a while, but we've done it in many ways through the European Commission, the Parliament, and finally the European Court in Luxembourg. But unfortunately, despite our efforts, we were not successful in preventing funds from going into the new and old institutions in Bulgaria. I've been there, I visited, I know what you guys have presented in this report. It's disgusting, it's terrible. What was clear from our advocacy and what is clear from the report is that disabled people in Bulgaria are not seen as equal citizens. They are not seen as equal human beings. At best, they are seen and treated as children. But children shouldn't be treated this way either. Nobody should be treated this way. Although it is tempting to say, we told you so, it is shocking to read that our predictions of what would become of the newly built or renovated group homes has become a reality. The places described in the report have nothing to do with the aspirations of the UN CRPD or the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, or the right to independent living, which I've been fighting for since 1993, the right to be included in the community. There are no different, these group homes are no different from the old institutions that we could see in the BBC documentaries that have been on the TV at different times. Disabled people are still locked up under the control of the staff, mistreated and tortured, without any control over their lives and with no prospect of ever leaving the walls that jail them. Some people I'd met had been there for 35 years and they said, why do you come here to try to help us? There's no way out. As Tanya said, they've become very hopeless. The desire for freedom, for being able to decide what they do, for support to live in their own home, is dismissed as something irrational. There is only one alternative to the places described in this report, and that is proper, individualized, one-on-one support in one's own home in the community. These places, these institutions the group homes are being built as a first step to what we call deinstitutionalization. Yet in Sweden, they weren't successful. They've been there since the 90s. Just recently, Sweden had a report written on personal assistance and how personal assistance is often seen as something more expensive. But this report done by an impartial actor, a very strong actor, shows that no, this is not a case. Personal assistance is not more expensive, it's not less expensive, but it gives much better quality for life. So that's what we propagate. There is only one alternative to the places described in this report, and as I said, that's to be able to live in one's home. For personal assistance, as defined in the General Comment 5, does not exist in Bulgaria, despite it being available in theory. Personal assistance is not the only support service that should be available, but it is key to independent living and should be available to all in need, including persons with intellectual disabilities or multiple disabilities. The right to legal capacity, accessible housing, inclusive education, and the right to work in the open labor market are other issues that need to be addressed as a matter of priority. Daycare centers are not an alternative and are not compliant with the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. Unfortunately, centers for independent living, user-led and promoting the independent living philosophy, having a key role in supporting independent living, practically do not exist in Bulgaria. We do have a member, the CIL Sofia Bulgaria, founded by the late Petkova. It does exist, but it is struggling to survive. Kapka herself died at work. I usually say we die on the battlefield. People are overworking because there's so much to be done. She died at her desk promoting independent living in a country so resistant to the concept and the right. At the European Network, we fully support all recommendations of this report, which should be read by the EU institutions, all the organizations, including those by and for disabled people in Bulgaria, which fail to challenge the system and presumably profit from it. We need this evidence and others like this to show those claiming that group homes are a step towards independent living are wrong and far from independent living. They are not a step or a transition to anything. They are just placeholders keeping people imprisoned. Like myself, people like myself, not considered worthy of a life. I am very aware that if I had not had my accident in Sweden, where there are relatively good social services, I could have ended up in a home facing abuse and human rights violations. If I had not had access to personal assistance, I would not have gotten a university degree or had the jobs that I have had, bringing me to speak at this conference today. In that sense, we welcome and are happy to support any future efforts to expose human rights violation in group homes and other institutions in Bulgaria and in Sweden, everywhere, and to remind everyone once again that institutions are no solutions. We say no more segregation, no more torture. And I thank you for this.
It's always such an honor to hear from you, Jamie, and I think Validity strongly supports your message that institutions are no solutions. And indeed, this is not a question of resourcing. This is often a question of will. We now move on to our final speaker before we move to the question and answer section. And this, I will shortly now give the floor to our great friend and colleague, Aneta Genova. Aneta Genova has been working in the areas of mental health and human rights as a lawyer since 2005. She worked previously for the Bulgarian Helsinki Committee and for what we used to be called the Mental Disability Advocacy Centre until 2013. Since then, she has been an independent lawyer, cooperating closely with Validity, and has represented clients in the cases of Šteinerte versus Bulgaria and Stankov versus Bulgaria before the European Court of Human Rights. She has been involved in the monitoring of institutions across Bulgaria, researching the rights of persons with disabilities and delivering training sessions, and is the founder of the Kira Foundation, an organization dedicated to exploring the gaps in legislation and implementation and the problems that lead to severe violations of the human rights of persons with disabilities. Aneta, we are delighted to have you with us. Thank you so much again for all of your leadership. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. I will thank you, everybody, for everything shared until now. I'm really moved from Tanya's testimony and everything said until now. And I'm very proud to be part of this conference, and thank you for the possibility to share my thoughts. As Stephen mentioned, I'm working in this field since 2005, but my first visit in institution was in 2003. I was a student in clinical social work, and by chance, for first time in my life, I went in such an institution, and I was really shocked to see the fences, the walls, the lack of basic human conditions. And in this place, I met people with their own stories, feelings, human. People who wanted to be outside, to have normal life, who had dreams, even in such conditions. Then I met Šteinerte, and we had this epic case before the European Court of Human Rights. And I'm still very sad because he passed away in institution, hadn't chance to have his legal capacity back and his freedom. In the perspective of so many years, it's very painful to say that how less changed in the lives of people with disabilities for so many years. The institutions are still exist in Bulgaria, and not only, even we have a convention for rights of people with disabilities, and Bulgaria ratified it in 2012. Even it's happened 12 years ago, we still have full guardianship in Bulgaria, and people deprived from legal capacity still haven't any rights. No actual access to justice, very poor access to justice, very difficult. they're treated as object and they're placed in institutions instead to receive proper support to live independent in the community as Convention for Rights of People with Disabilities requires. In all these years, we saw many formal change in the institutions. In the beginning, they created small group homes inside of the institutional settings, and in many cases, it still exists. Then the authorities created the small group homes, and as Tanya mentioned just several minutes ago, the state created these small group homes with using European funds, which is a shame to have small institutions in Bulgaria and not only funded with European money, where so severe violence still happens. So the institutional culture still exists in Bulgaria, and we cannot see any change. There is a lot of observation in this direction, and the answer of the authorities and the institutions themselves is always one and same. I will point only the answer we received from the institutions we visit during the last monitoring visit, which is presented in the reports we are discussing today. In all cases, the authorities and the institutions stated that it's not their problem. Maybe these problems exist in Bulgaria, but not in this particular institution, not in this psychiatric hospital, not in this small group homes. Or if it is something, it is not wrong. It's according to the law. Like, for example, everywhere, each one small group home or institution state that guardianship is not a problem because it's according to national law. So they have to put persons under guardianship and keep them deprived from legal capacity. Something else, small group homes that highlights that in their responses to our findings in the report, that they are not institutions because they are not isolated. They are placed in popular areas. Some of them are in cities or small towns. So according to them, this means that they are not segregated, but not mentioned, of course, that there are fences and people are restricted, people have not keys usually in mostly everywhere. They cannot go outside without permission, and as Tanya explained, if they go outside, they have to explain when exactly they will come back. Otherwise, they can be bring back with police. Which means, of course, it's segregated situation, it's segregated place. In all responses we received, the institutions explained that our findings are attempts to create a false picture of the small group homes because they are nice, they provide care for people, they do their best. In all these answers, the pattern was, the stress was on the image of the institutions, how the institutions will look like in the front of the society as how the society will see the institutions, and the attempt of the personnel, the directors, the authorities to justify what happened with these institutions, which is far from the best interest of the people places there. It's far from the best interest and the individual interest of the people with disabilities. So to be short, because we almost have no time, I will say that I think there is only one solution, and it is zero institutions. If we have even one institution in place, this mimicry will prolong, and the authorities will prolong to justify their actions, the isolation of people with disabilities, stating that it is for their good, best interest, and refusing to provide them the support people needed. Because of that, I think our fight should be for zero institutions, which means zero small homes, zero institutions. I know it's a long-term fight, it's a long path, but we have to prolong our work in this direction. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your very, very important insights, Aneta. I think it is clear that in many countries, there is still a strong commitment to institutionalized forms of services for persons with disabilities. And I think Validity strongly agrees with your perspective that we must get to the point where institutionalization is never a realistic option for persons with disabilities. We must end that system. So thank you very much to all of our speakers today. And I understand Elīna Šteinerte has had to leave us a little bit earlier than the end of this webinar, but we now have a few minutes for some questions and answers. If you'd like to come in and speak your question, please raise your hand and one of my colleagues will unmute you. But what we'll first do is read through the questions that we have already received as a first round. I will give the floor to the speakers who would like to address those questions. The first question that I have received, the first person requesting to ask a question, I believe, was Kayanga Peter. If we have Kayanga Peter here, could you please unmute and ask your question? Try to unmute to ask your question. Have you seen? If not, then perhaps you can let us know when you're able to unmute. We'll move on to one of the written questions we've received. The first comes from Tina Minkovitz. She says, first, greetings to Tanya and all. I have a question for Elīna Šteinerte. Will the SPT withdraw its document titled Approach of the Subcommittee, Prevention of Torture, and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment regarding the rights of persons institutionalized and treated medically without informed consent? In that document, the SPT endorsed the use of involuntary hospitalization treatment subject to safeguards contrary to state parties' obligations under the CRPD. We will, of course, pass this question on to Elīna after this. The next question is addressed to Ms. Amalia Gamio. This is from Sabiha Majid from the University of Pretoria Centre for Human Rights in South Africa. She says, how do we tackle discrimination against persons with disabilities within society, given the fact discriminatory beliefs and practices are so deeply ingrained in the fabric of our society? Amalia, would you like to come in?
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you for the question. I am certainly that we should continue fighting, continue raising awareness, because many people, even the governors, even the psychiatrists and other people think that it is better to put persons with disabilities in institutions because they are protecting people with disability. That is not true. We know that, but they go for the easy way. I mean, it's easy for them to put people in institutions and don't see them. They don't want to see them, and they believe that they disappear. But the truth is that it's more expensive in terms of financial and in terms of course, autonomy and dignity to put persons with disability in institutions instead of redirect the resources to community services, to personal assistance, to involve all the society to include persons with disabilities in the best way. I am completely sure that we should continue to raising aware and talking about these violations in institutions, shouting about this violation in institutions in any place. I mean, in webs, in networks, in everywhere we are. We should continue raising aware. Thank you very much.
Can I say something, Stephen?
Yes, please do, Jamie.
No, I agree with you, Amalia, raising awareness. I think also when it comes to raising awareness on using the law as a tool and also on empowerment to individuals so that we can change laws in our country so that we get better legislation against discrimination, for example, on guardian legislation, etc. Thank you. Just a short.
Thank you very much, Jamie, and thank you very much, Amalia, for these very, very important reflections as well. We have another question, and we have two more questions that I will read out. And in the interests of time, I'm afraid these will be the final two questions that we can address. The first, I believe, is addressed to Validity from Tanya Montanari. She says she's from the European Social Charter Council of Europe. She says, how do you intend to implement the recommendations made in the report? I think I can address that quickly to say Validity, of course, does not have any power to implement the European Social Charter. However, it is a document that we actively use to promote the rights of persons with disabilities, including the collective complaint mechanisms that exist under that. And we will, of course, be using that not just in Bulgaria, but in other countries as well. The last question that we will come to, or in the Q&A, is from Eric T. He says, I see in the report that it says your findings show that an institutional quote, culture exists in Bulgarian group homes. You powerfully demonstrate that this is so, but please explain whether Validity or others are taking the position that all group homes are inherently institutions, or whether it is the specific culture or coercion that makes a group home an institution. Can you imagine a non-coerced group home? At this point, I'd like, if I may, to give the floor back to Tanya Petkova, not just to address this question, but to provide any other reflections she would also like to give. Tanya, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. I would like to add something about the small group homes that Aneta just talked about, how people say that they are located in the cities. The harsh truth is that they are very often located right next to the graveyard.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And this is a striking reflection. I remember many of those places in Bulgaria. I also remember that they exist in many other places as well. I see, I would just like to ask our panelists and guests if anyone else would like to address the question related to institutional culture that we heard from Eric. I'd like to come in, Jane.
I can try.
Thank you.
I believe that any institution, group homes, even a family can be an institution if the person cannot get their voice through, cannot make a difference and not decide in their lives, do not have access to self-determination. All countries, including Sweden, have group homes. They say that it's cheaper. A lot of the parent organizations fight for group homes because they want to keep them. They think that their children are more protected there. I just know there's too much violence and think they should all be closed, but it's convincing all these people that this is true and making sure that the person that whoever the person we're talking about who needs the support, that they get the support they need. Living in a home is not the solution, but that they can get the support early enough to live in their own home so that they can then have a better life the whole time, rather than being put in this group homes. But we have this fight all over Europe, I think, no matter which country we're talking about. They're still building institutions everywhere.
Thank you, Jamie, and for reminding us deinstitutionalization is not purely about buildings. It is about a structure and a culture which restricts the autonomy and inclusion of persons with disabilities. And indeed, I suppose on behalf of Validity and most directly to Eric, I can say that the group home model has failed. The evidence that we are publishing here again today with our colleagues from Bulgaria, but also elsewhere where this model is being used, show, I think, quite conclusively that the model is not centered in the choice and control of persons with disabilities about where and with whom they live. Where this model has become a real problem, I think, is that it is now being replicated as the solution to deinstitutionalization in Bulgaria and beyond. Clearly, that model is not working, as I think we strongly demonstrate here today. At this point, we are 3 minutes beyond our allotted time, and so I will have to bring our meeting to a close today. But I do ask you all, first of all, to thank you, to all of our speakers who have joined us today, for sharing your insights, for sharing your testimonies, and for supporting the work that Validity and our partners in Bulgaria are doing to highlight the real problems in that country with this group home model. Thank you deeply for your contributions today, your ongoing support and partnership on this crucially important issue. Secondly, I'd like to thank very much our interpreters, our sign language interpreters, and also our captioners today, who have assisted us to make this a more accessible event. The recording of this event will shortly be uploaded to the website of Validity, along with the transcript of the discussions that we have had today. We will be following up with all of the speakers to provide a summary of the questions and answers that have come in, and we are very much hoping to promote ongoing discussion, both in Bulgaria, more widely in Europe, but also at the level of United Nations human rights treaty bodies on how we can best advance our collective call to ensure the rights of people with disabilities live included fully in the community. Thank you very much to all of the speakers. Thank you to everyone who has participated today. And we wish you a very good rest of the day, evening, or night, wherever in the world you are currently based. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.